It's How I Make Money with Andy Beadle. This is How I Make Money. I'm your host, Andy Beadle. Our guest today is Phil Rose. He is the head of Ignium at igniumconsult.com. I'm going to spell it. It's IGNIUM consult.com. And Phil and his crew are business coaches. Before we get started, I do want to say to everybody, check out igniumconsult.com. They have a great section of the website called Spark Tank. Not only do I love the name as a marketer, but there's a lot of just, I think, tremendous info in there, Phil. And you have really, I think, jumped ahead with this idea of giving away valuable content without any kind of a relationship. So before we get going, tell people a little bit about Spark Tank and what's going on with that section of your website.
Great question, Andy. Great to meet you. Thank you. And thanks for inviting me on the podcast as well.
Sure.
So Spark Tank was an idea we sparked 2 years back, 2018. And it was all about how do we create imagination in businesses? And creativity to me is really key. And we wanted to come up with something where people delve into it and find useful information. And we realized, there's lots of stuff out there. You can go on the web and you Google stuff, but we wanted a repository where, hey, there's lots of information about engaging people, about building a business. And initially, how do we connect people on purpose? And Spark Tank is that idea generator. We want to just spark ideas, spark imagination, get people to delve in there and see what they can find. And, we'd love to work with them, but actually, we just want to give them information as well, because we believe that's valuable in the first place.
And I do a lot of research prior to doing an episode just to kind of go through people's web presence and really understand the core of what they do. And I was struck, and maybe this is just that great confluence of events. I was reading something from Harvard Business, and they were just talking about how when you are in a leadership position and you're constantly trying to move big goals forward, but you're also just caught up in the day-to-day stuff that your team needs from you, stepping back for a little bit and just clearing your mind is a very, that's not really the way to put it, but stepping away so that you can have good ideas that are just kind of come out of that, I'd call it creative void. Getting this bank and this time to have ideas, I feel like that Spark Tank idea, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the stuff I read in there was very, I guess I want to say creative as well as being practical, if that makes any sense at all.
And Andy, that's what we try to do. I was saying just now, before we get cut off, I look at the world really simply in terms of growing a business. And the first book my accountant gave me when I set up my business in 2004 was Micah E. Gerber's book, The E-Myth Revisited. In there, she said, my accountant said to me, he said, Phil, read this before you start your business. And I still went and started the business despite what Angela said to me. And the key that Michael Gerber said is work on your business more than working in your business. Otherwise, you get trapped. Right. And I really want business owners, business leaders, business founders, whatever they want to be called, to take time out of their day job. Because if they're just doing, they're never going to grow.
Yep. Agreed.
And that's the key. If you look in the US, you look in the UK, you look at Australia, there's too many people, or so many people sat in the business as one person businesses, one man band, one woman bands, and they're not going to grow unless they step up and come above it. And that's why I want Spark Tank to be that idea generator. But you've got to make time to do it. If you don't make time, you'll get consumed with client work and you're never going to grow. Simple.
And I think people hear that a lot, and now we're just going to go down this rabbit hole for a little bit. I think people hear that a lot, work on your business in it, and intellectually everybody goes, oh, yeah, and then all the time. And it's funny, as I move on, I'm in my third decade in business now, and as we move on, I realize over time that these issues like working on versus working in are just like every other big piece of a well-balanced life, right? It's everybody instinctively knows you can't spend all of your time working and neglect your friends and your family.
Yeah.
Everybody knows you can't spend all of your time sitting on the couch and neglect your physical health. Everybody knows, as much as we all want to eat the chips and the fried fish and the kebab, we really ought to think about a salad more often than we eat those things. And that, for me, the working on versus in, I listen to business owners all the time, and they go, I don't have time for this kind of stuff, and so on and so forth. And in the same way that, it's like you don't have time not to, right?
And this is the key. I've just been reading a book on Audible. Or I say reading a book, or listening to a book on Audible. And Andy, I've turned 50 last year, and I know, don't say it, I may not look it, but yeah, I turned 50. And the book that someone recommended to me is a book called Younger Next Year by a New York doctor. I can't remember his name at this moment. And this edition, he was 84 when he was narrating it. And
wow.
he gives some great advice on what people over the age of 50 need to start doing. And it's the things that we all know we should be doing: drinking less, sleeping more, exercising more, getting out more, meeting your friends more, all those things. And I think a lot of it is we know instinctively what we should be doing, but we never make time to do it because something else is more pressing. And for me, growing your business is about making that time, because you might use that word about life and work. Life and work integrate. We've all been through this last year of pandemic. We're going to have it for a number of years going forward. And life and work have really had to balance, because we've all been at home with the kids and the family and the dog and the pets. We now also got to manage our business, and that's the same. And I think for us, we know we should be doing this. We also know we've got to get balance with time. And sometimes you just need to make a priority. It's about clearing your diary and saying what's really important. Because I know as a 50-year-old man, I know that in the next 30 years, my muscles are going to deteriorate 10% per decade.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about that, I want to be able to run and play with my grandkids when I get to 80. So I've got to do some stuff now. And if I don't make a priority for it, when I get to 80, I'm going to be a shriveled old man sitting on the bed dribbling. So I know I've got to do something about it. And business is the same. If you want this, you've got to do this. It's as simple as that. And it's really hard to say, how do I do it? But actually it is make time, commit to it, and understand where do you want to be, and then work out what is it you need to do right now to make yourself on that journey.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it may sound really simple to say, yes, it's harder to do, but that's the principle of it. I have my vision of what I want when I'm 80, and I've got to start work now.
And I think a business has to work the same way. And a lot of the owners that I talk to who are, it's funny, I have a kind of it's almost like there's two camps of people in the business owners I know. There are the people who are kind of on autopilot, is a generous way to put it, but their business has matured in a way that they're constantly looking for, what's a new thing, or what's a way we could improve, or they're very outward focused on improving, their lives, the lives of their employees, the lives of their customers, that kind of a thing. And it's what I would kind of call a healthy, happy balance. And then the other camp are the people who are just, you see them and they're like, oh my God, things are hard. Oh, it's terrible. And this, that, and the other. In the past year, obviously, there's been quite a bit more of that because it's been so challenging on people economically. But the people I know who have really survived and thrived as a result of this are the ones who stepped back and said, okay, I have a minimal amount of control over my environment right now. Mm-hmm. What can I do today to improve my circumstances? Yeah. And rather than worrying about, hey, I got to fix all these details. It was, maybe it's an innovation. Around here, the big deal here was the state changed their alcohol license and allowed restaurants to let cocktails be take for takeout, right? Which was a big deal. Okay. And then people said, I'm going to make menus around that so it's a whole meal. And then they said, how can I make my takeout experience better if somebody has to drive half an hour? And you think that's trivial, but that's working on your business and not in it, in an emergency, right?
And I love that, and the word that's been bandied around the world in the last year is this word pivot. And pivot's a word which, it doesn't mean much to a lot of people, but basically it's around, how do I create something? If cocktails are now licensed, what can I do with them? Right. In the UK, the village pub is the center of the universe, because people congregate in the pub. And even if you don't drink, it's a great social place. Right. I read about publicans doing different things. So one publican I read about, he bought a barrel of beer and he strapped it to the back of his bike, and he went around the village on his bike serving pints up from his bike. Now that's pivoting, and that's doing something different. And I was talking I did a podcast with a guy in Austria back a few months ago, and he was talking about an ice cream parlor in the village he lives in. But of course, their market is selling ice creams in the summer to all the people who come to the Alps. And suddenly they found nobody's coming to the Alps. So what do? They found a supplier of small containers who happened to be based in Holland, and they started packaging their ice cream and selling it to all the supermarkets locally. Wow. Just being different. And they had to think differently to work out, what do we need to do to survive? And there's a great phrase around the world, and I get it wrong in the sense that most innovation comes out in times of trouble, be it war, famine, pestilence, whatever it might be. We go into creative mode and we have to survive, and we come up with different ways. And in some ways, that's what this pandemic has done. It's helped people think differently, in a lot of cases, not all, about how do I get out? I've got to survive. I've got to make money. I've got to keep my business afloat.
Right.
What do I do differently? And that's the key, I think, just thinking differently. And if we could all do that all the time, it could be skyrocketing our businesses.
Yeah, agreed. Well, and our lives as a whole. All right, we've gone down a rabbit hole, but more to the point, tell us about Ignium and how you started this coaching business. Kind of what was your journey to decide that this was the way you were going to serve people, and talk a little bit about how you got started and how the business is structured now.
Yeah, thank you. So look, I'm going to tell the story from the beginning in a very quick way. I'm an engineer by background, and as an engineer, I was an aircraft engine engineer. And as an aircraft engine engineer, I was asked questions, and I had to give answers. Because if I got the question wrong, aeroplanes fell out of the sky, which isn't a good thing when you're flying across the Atlantic. So as an engineer, I was paid for the answers I gave. I went through my journey, and I realized I love engineering. I love seeing how things work. Over the last 20 years ago, I went and did an MBA, and an MBA at that time had a lot of credibility in it, in my view. And I learned a lot of things about strategy. But also I learned the big thing around is I love small businesses, and I love seeing how they work, and I love the nuts and bolts of them. I also realized I didn't have all the answers. And therefore, what did I have? And that was questions. So I developed from being an engineer giving answers to a coach asking questions, but it took a long time. So when I created my business, my first business was in 2004, and I created an electronics business. It was a way of getting out of the corporate rat race, Andy. I had two young kids. In fact, I had one young kid at the time, and I wanted to see my daughter a bit more. And I felt I was driving to work every day, working, coming home, and I'd leave when she was asleep, and I'd come home when she was asleep, and I'd never see the bit in the middle, apart from the videos my wife used to take to show what the baby was like. And anyone who's got a young baby realizes the baby doesn't do much in the first year, but the videos were, they were interesting. So I created this plan of building a video monitoring system for babies. You could put it over the cot, and you could see it, and you could watch it all the way through. And the problem was, 20 years ago, if anyone remembers, we didn't have these things. We didn't have iPhones. We didn't have Androids. We didn't have screens.
Right.
So the equipment I was trying to buy was too expensive, and the screens were tiny. They were 1 inch by 2 inch square maximum. So the product I was trying to create wasn't right for the time. I like to think my thinking was ahead of the game, but either way, the product I was buying wasn't right. So my business failed. And if anyone wants to buy a 20-year-old video monitoring system, I've got a garage full of them now. They're great. Never used, but they're in good condition. Anyway, what I realized is I want to go and help other people make less mistakes than I did. And I realized I had one key thing. I could ask questions, and I got some experience of doing it. I'd been through the corporate jungle, come out the other side. So I started a business which was around a consultancy, looking at how do I grow people. And I realized the skill I had was all my MBA notes. And a friend of mine who was running a business at the time said to me, Phil, I've got a whole load of sales guys in my team who are progressing to manager, but they're no good as managers. They're great salespeople. Do you think you could condense all our MBA notes and train them? And I said, of course I can, because my stock answer was yes. Right. So I took a pile of MBA notes and made some training courses. And I started training these sales guys on how to manage, how to lead. What I realized I was doing over the next few years, I was coaching them, because I didn't have all the answers. All I had was my MBA notes, which I'd condensed into some PowerPoints. And I created coaching programs. And I was then coaching these individuals. Over the next 4 years, between about 2004 and 2008, I went away from consulting to becoming a coach.
Okay.
Because that was the bit I realized delivered real value for people. And I realized my passion and my purpose was about changing people's lives. And that may seem like a really grand thing, but actually it was just I realized I could ask questions. And by asking a pertinent question, I could make you sit up and listen and think, oh, that's interesting. I need to do something different. And that's when I got hooked on this coaching journey. So over the last 13 years now, I've trained as a coach, primarily as a business coach, but in the end, I'm coaching people. So I'm a people coach. I just ask questions, and I always say it's a bit like holding the mirror up to somebody and showing you what's really going on for you. Mm-hmm. So I came into consultancy, and I developed my business into a coaching business. And that's where Ignium is now. Ignium is a combination of consultancy and coaching. But what I do is coach people to step up and make changes in their lives. That's a long-winded answer to answer your question, but that's where I am now as a coach.
Well, and I think there's a lot of value in having had a practical, so to speak, career, and to understand that journey from the corporate world to the world of being an entrepreneur. And on top of that, to sort of see the change as it happens. I mean, that was it. You moved out of engineering and then you're in a space that's growing rapidly. And then over time, those changes accelerate. And just the ability to navigate that transition, I think, sets you apart from a lot of people. I mean, so I was a university professor. I left teaching and then went into business. And I say to people, gosh, I've never had a real job. Right. And it's kind of a joke, kind of not. But the perspective that you bring from that path that you took to get where you are, I think does a lot to inform how you serve clients. And I love that idea of saying I went from giving answers to asking questions. And that's such a powerful idea. And talk a little bit about that. I think when people say to themselves, oh, I'm going to get coached, they want to be told, right? And to have their coach say, well, I'm not here to tell, I'm here to ask, that's a little bit of a cognitive dissonance there. So tell me a little bit about how people react when you don't have all the answers for them. That's got to be crushingly disappointing, right?
Yeah, and it is sometimes. And it's so I say to people, look, I say I work across 6 C's. Those C's, capital C rather than SEA.
Right.
I work in content and context. So I help people come up above upper layer, because we can get stuck in content. Whereas as a coach, I can see things you can't, because I can raise above it. And if you're the individual, I can help you see the context with your work on. So first 2 C's, content and context. Second 2 C's are culture and commercial. Because I could go into any business and make it more commercially viable, raise your prices, increase your revenue, decrease your costs. You make a more commercial business. Actually, I know the biggest value comes from making a better cultural business, get people to work better, get people to enjoy their business. So that's the next 2 C's, culture and commercial. Next 2 C's is coaching and consulting. And it's an and conversation, because I carry 2 suitcases. And in one suitcase, I've got my tool bag of all of my tools. So at the moment, I'm a scaling up coach. Scaling up as a brand. Vern Harnish created it in the US, came out of MIT. And in there, I've got my scaling up tools, as well as a whole load of other tools. And I know that if I brought out the first tool to you, Andy, and said, hey, we're going to do this, and told you exactly how someone else did it, you're not going to get the same result you need. Because I have to then dip into my other suitcase, which is the coaching toolkit, and say, okay, how are we going to make this work for you, Andy? Here's the tool. Let's make it bespoke to you. And by working on the tool and coaching you, yes, I have some answers, but actually what I have is just a framework. And I just ask questions to help you make it yours. And that's where the real value comes. So to answer your question, how do people react? Actually, I just bring out both suitcases. And sometimes I say metaphorically, look, I'm going to put my coaching hat on now, and I'm going to ask you some questions. Or I'm going to put my consulting hat on and tell you an answer. But then say, how does that feel? Because that's the coaching part of it. That makes sense. You get that balance in the two. So so 6 C's is where I start my life.
So how do you when you work with a client, and talk a little bit about what does your typical engagement look like? And I know, one of the things we concentrate on in the podcast is really talking about how people's businesses work. And it's something that, for example, for many years, my first marketing firm specialized in colleges and universities. And so, how we got clients and how we work with them was very much governed by that structure, if you will. How do people find you, and then how do you engage with them? Because I'm sure you've got a huge mix of types of businesses and the people that work with you and sort of what their roles are. Talk a little bit about how that ecosystem has been set up and how you operate within it.
Yeah, great question. So for me, I always say that, as a coach, I slap myself when I hear myself say this, because, I say I'm not a salesperson, I'm not a marketeer, but what I do is I love going and talking. I love getting up on stage. So in the real world, before pandemic hit, I'd love to be on stage. I'd love to be running physical workshops and getting people in there, because then I can engage people. And to get people on stage, I've got to go through a process. So, typical funnel for us is about marketing. It's about social media messaging. but our business is very much B2B, if that type of thing still exists.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, it's things like LinkedIn is a big avenue for us. So we post regularly on there, and we post good quality content. We're not trying to sell, not trying to push it. Just here's some content that might work for you.
Right.
I've dabbled with things like Instagram and Facebook, and probably need to do less dabbling and more really getting into it. But those things are level workers as well.
Right.
The key is, I mentioned scaling up. So scaling up is a great business, came out of the US. There's a good following to people. If they want to go and look at how to scale their businesses, often people will type in scaling my business and you'll come across scaling up. So I'm one of 7 or 8 UK-based scaling up coaches.
Oh, great.
So
Okay.
if people engage with scaling up, there's 190 or so of us around the world. There's a small portion of us in the UK. They come to scaling up and then they find us in the UK. And we basically run workshops. And the workshops we know will just give entrepreneurs and founders just another view on how their business could be running.
Mm-hmm.
And if they get that view, they then often choose to work with us. So I don't know if that answers your question fully, but it's around workshop marketing as our key thing. But we have to just get the message out there through
Sure.
the LinkedIn channel and through email marketing.
Well, and something that you've said there, it really speaks to, at least to my mind, how in a business-to-business context, it's how things need to be done these days. And I say this all the time, and members of my team and my clients, I'm sure, are sick of hearing it. And that is, time is the fire in which we burn. And so, and the other thing is, if the problem can be solved by money, it's not really a problem. So, those two things. And I think, as you mentioned, these platforms, and this is super nitty gritty from a business owner standpoint, if you're in the business to business space, it's really a challenge, and especially in the last year where events have just vanished, right? So these opportunities to go meet people are gone. But to go to a platform like LinkedIn and say, oh, look at me, here's a discount code, here's the thing I'm doing, is really to miss the opportunity to establish yourself as somebody who's there, A, with authority and knowledge, and B, to be of service. And the commitment to put that content out is non-trivial, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I really understand that. And then as you say, you kind of, okay, do I want to try Instagram? What's that going to look like? Am I going to try Facebook? What is that going to look like? Something that we're finding that's absolutely flabbergasting to me. But again, those of us in the over 50 set, we're on the back end of the technology curve now, is the amount of business content on TikTok, of all things. It's startling.
It's interesting, isn't it, when you talk about those other channels? Because I think there's other ways of getting our messages out there. And you mentioned about TikTok, and the only time I've looked at TikTok is when my daughters show me some fun video to watch, right. and then I suddenly find 3 hours later I'm still looking at TikTok.
Yeah.
But I think there's a thing there you mentioned about giving away content, because some people are afraid of giving content in case people pick it up and use it and never come back to work with them.
Right.
My view is they were never going to work with you anyway.
Right.
So actually put the good stuff out. We could read any of the books on the bookshelf and do it. But actually, once you get your content out there, it actually elevates you into a position of authority. And if you come back to, Robert Cialdini wrote a book around influence. And if you look at one of those things, it's actually about the expert status. And if you can give content out that says, I know what I'm talking about, some people will choose to come and say, Phil, we'd like some help. Others people will say, Phil, thanks very much. I've got everything I need. That's okay. It's the ones we want to work with. And I think, coming back to think about, mentioned about time, and, I love your thing about time is the fire in which we burn. What I do actually is give people back time, help them make more money, and give them more fun, less stress.
Yep.
And I would say, that's all my job is. If I can give you more time, more money, less stress, what would you do with it? And where do you want to choose? Because a lot of people say, do you know what? You give me all the money in the world, but I'd be still stressed. So my job is to say, okay, how do I help you have more fun? Get more out of your business. And that's, I think, the type of stuff I can give away, because we can put that stuff out there. And I want people to come and find that information on Spark Tank or wherever else we put it, and just say, we can use this and make value of it and change our lives in some way, because we can go and stay home and see the wife, husband, kids, dog, whatever we want to do, because I've now got more time to do it. So that's my take on this marketing. It's about getting a message out so somebody can use it. If I can influence people to make a change, our job's done.
Sure. Well, let's talk about the scale up idea. And I there are so many phrases that make their way into business vocabulary, and they kind of come and go. And mindfulness is a big one now, and the notion of scale is something that has been in the lexicon for a very long time, and very few people understand what it means, really, at least in my opinion. But I come from this. When I was in high school, just around the Pleistocene era, we still had to you took wood shop, or technical drawing, or I think they still had home ec, which was, kind of introduction to the kitchen and what. So I took technical drawing and sat in a room and learned to do those old school drawings. This is before CAD programs. And you would always have the drawing from the book and you would copy it. And it was always important to say, well, what's the scale of this drawing? And it was a very precise craft and a thing that you learned quite a bit about, and learning to do projections and 3 dimensions and all this kind of jazz. But what really struck with me and has ever since I was a kid was this notion of scale is not simply the idea of getting bigger. It is the idea of taking a thing and saying, here is a thing that works as it is, and it is now capable of being expanded and still being that thing. And when we, from a marketing standpoint, talk to clients, one of the things we talk about all the time is we say, hey, your holy grail is what we call product market fit. Yeah. And finding product market fit is the quest of a lifetime, right? and when you have it, it's beautiful, because then all you have to do is pour money into the marketing program, and then you get more dollars out the back end. And to me, scale is about getting to the place where you have the thing that works and then expanding it, not simply just growing. So, and maybe your approach is a little different, but I've always thought of that when I've, as I go forward and think of people, oh, we need to scale. I said, well, do you have a thing that's scalable, or are you just talking about growing? Because those are two different things in my book. Yeah.
And I love that thing about the drawings and the scale. And I might steal some of your thinking around that, because I love that thinking. And it takes me back to my university degree when I had to do technical drawing, exactly the same thing as you, and then running off blueprints of them afterwards.
Right.
And I think this word blueprint is key, because we always talk about the blueprints. If anyone's watched Iron Man over the last year, we've been glued to all the Marvel movies over the last year. We've seen them all many times, and I still come back to Iron Man there. And I think if you look at Robert Downey Jr. in that role, he's the inventor, he's the creator of Iron Man. And if you see him go downstairs in his Malibu house, and you see the workshop laid out there with the cars, but you also see him in work. That picture. And to me, the key to a business is creating the blueprint for being able to do it again and again and again. And that's when you get scale. So your thing about growth versus scale, I think, is key. If I look at how to grow the value of a business, I have a nominal pyramid I work on. And you can't see me on the podcast, but I'm drawing this pyramid. And at the base of my pyramid is what I call talent, skills, and culture. The right people on the bus, with the right skills, doing the right job, in the right roles. That's the key. And you can build your pyramid as big as you want it on that. You have to go to the next level next, which is actually, how do you then systemize what you've got? And that's about understanding. You talk about product market fit. How do I create a product that's going to be able to roll out time and time again? How do I train you, Andy, to come and do my job? To make me as the owner redundant. Because most businesses fail because of the skills of the owner, because they get trapped in it. So I have to get me, the owner, out of the way and put a team in place that can just run it, run, repeat, do it again, to get that systemization in place. And then we can design new products. Then we can design new markets. We can create a great brand. And, we'll talk about brand later on, but you're the expert on that. But, if you create a great brand, you can, the elastic brand analogy always came about. And the key is, the next step is scalability. Because if you can create a business, got all those facets in it, we can then take it to the US, we can take it to India, we can take it to Australia, and do the same again. So to me, scaling is actually enabling the business to run smoothly. And in scaling up, we talk about, the key things is, we'll give you twice the cash flow, typically 3 times the profitability, and 10 times the valuation. And the ability to scale a business is where the valuation comes from. So if you're a business owner and you want to scale, systemize, because then you can just do it in the same way Iron Man can replicate. We need the blueprint for your business, and we'll just do it again. That's the key.
And I love that idea, because it's so true, and now I'm mildly depressed. Businesses fail because of the skills of the owner, and that's absolutely brilliant. I mean, and I think I've never heard it put that clearly before, but that's a pretty stark and true statement. And it's not because of the lack of skill of the owner; it's because of really the excessive skills of the owner. Yeah, I mean, that's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. How do you take an owner who, and this is, I think, fairly typical. I did this too. I left academe. I started a business. I was building websites for colleges and universities. I was doing it on my own. And then I kind of slowly brought things in, and I did everything, and not only that, I did everything. I made more money than I'd ever had in my life. It was great. And I was like, oh, this is super. And then, I'll bring on more. And then eventually you're just depressed because there's just too much to do. Mm-hmm. And then when somebody comes and says to you, the real problem is that you're too good at doing all these different things. That's a tough thing to hear, man. How do you get people around that hump?
And the hard thing is, you've got to be open for the conversation we're going to have next. Because actually, I can draw a map, and in product marketing, we talk about people going through the S curve. You start off and then you lose some money, and then the business builds up momentum, and then it plateaus out and declines. And if you look at any business journey, on day one, day one, you are excited setting up your business. It's just you and you're having fun. Day two, you're thinking, oh my God, I'm having fun, but I got a list as long as my arm to work through. Day three, whenever day three is, you're then thinking, oh my gosh, I've got so much to do. I've got customers coming in. It's getting a bit frantic and anxious. And actually, there's a real risk there that businesses fail at that day 3 point, wherever day 3 is. And that's because the enthusiasm the owner's got them there. So I draw a journey out for people and say, look, you're just busy. Your business is going to go through the same S curve, whether you're a product or a business. And that business is going to grow. And at some point, you're going to hit a brick wall. And there's a great business called Sherlows I worked with for many years. And Sherlows had this brick wall analogy. And business owners hit the brick wall fairly early on, and they have to do something to get through it. And that's just invest in a team or invest in some other technology. Mm-hmm. You come out the other side, and a bit like, going back to my airline experience, the plane uses most fuel getting off the ground. Once you're up at cruise at 30,000 feet for then you're cruising, it's easy. But you've got to inject the fuel to get yourself up there.
Right.
So in these early days, inject the fuel in, put cash in, building it, and your business will start growing. And it will start growing to a point where your business is making more money today than it made yesterday, and it will make more money tomorrow, and you keep making money. But at some point, the money journey stops, and we get to a point where we talk about payback. And that's where business owners are making more money today than they made before, and they're achieving their dream. And they suddenly realize they've got a problem because they can't take the foot off the gas. Because now I'm running the business, and I've got a team of people around me. And when I take my foot off the gas, the business stalls. So we get into a period of frustration and stress, and ultimately we hit another brick wall. And that second brick wall is really hard. That's where we get dis-ease, heart attack, stress, divorce, all those other things. Mm-hmm. You slam up against that brick wall, and your business will fail unless you make some judgment around it. Because it can take 3 to 7 years to get through that next brick wall. You go through research. And if you come out the other side, there's 3 options when you come out the other side. One of those is plateau, and plateau always leads to decline. The other is growth again. And when you get into that growth, business owners feel lost. Because they say to me, I don't know what I'm going to do in my business now because it's running so well. I've got a team of people. I can go and play golf. I can go and sail. I can go and ski. So your question was, how do I get people to change? I paint that picture of every business goes through the same story, same journey. And one day you will hit the wall, Andy, and you'll have to do something different. You have a choice. Like me looking towards when I want to get to 80 and I want to be fit and running around. I know at 50, I need to take some different lifestyle choices. Business is the same. Do things differently. Put systems in place. Trust people who are better than you to do the job better than you. Get people in. Empower your teams. Give them responsibility. And then I can take a seat back and start being creative and working on the business. You guys can run it. One day, hey, we might sell it and I'll go off into the sunset, but I'll feel proud I've created something. So the story I tell is what engages people. Then they have a choice. I either want to do something about it now, I'll wait till I hit the wall. I'll call you on when I'm in the hospital bed suffering from the stress and the heart attack and the burnout. It's a choice. Sorry to be extreme.
Well, and to go back to that health analogy, there's a great cartoon. I think my dad sent it to me years ago, and it's a guy sitting in one of those, the rooms you go into when you go to the doctor, and he's in his gown, and the doctor comes in and says, well, you know, what would be more convenient for you, to exercise for an hour every day or to be dead for 24 hours every day? And that's pretty stark, you know? So
This is I think it's, you know, we always talk about, you know, people selling to pain. When I set up my business back in 2004, as an engineer, I realized I didn't know how to sell. So I went on a Sandler sales training course. And for any of your listeners who have been on sales training, some of them will have heard of Sandler sales training.
Sandler, we call it Sandler here, the American
Sandler,
version.
Sandler. And
Great
Sandler's
stuff,
all about selling to the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And David Sandler used to tell this story about, you know, you go in for your annual medical once you reach 50, and the consultant says, we're just going to do a chest x-ray, Mr. Beadle. And he brings the x-ray out and he slaps the x-ray on one of those machines, looks at it, and he just goes, have you got a moment? You've just gone from coming in for a medical to an unlimited checkbook wanting to do some work to fix yourself in that very instant of intake and deep breath. Sometimes that's the thing we need as business owners. We need someone to hold up the x-ray and say, if I was you, I'd change.
Yeah. And it's hard for people to hear that. And I think it's also hard because when you are an entrepreneur, especially in a smaller company, so much of that daily activity becomes part of your identity, and yet in a very unconscious and unconsidered way, right?
Yeah.
We get, you know, we grow up, maybe we get married or we have a partner, you know, that relationship evolves organically. We don't give it a lot of thought. Most people, to be honest with you have kids, you just go, oh, kids are great, I should spend more time with them. You don't give it a lot of thought. And then this business comes along and it consumes all of your time. And yet the really stunning thing about the business to me is that of all the areas of your life where you have control, your business is probably one of the few where you really can exercise control.
Yes.
Like your relationships with other people are partnerships. You don't exercise control in those. You exercise, you know, relationship skills and back and forth and understanding how to support each other. You know, in a business, you don't obviously control your team, so to speak, but you have so much control over so many elements, and yet we refuse to exercise that control because we're afraid. I don't really know why we choose not to exercise that control. It's mind-boggling to me.
And interesting, actually. This control thing, I think, is key. I think people go into businesses for different reasons. You know, I often say to people now, I'm unemployable by a corporate because I've been doing what I do for 15 years. You know, they wouldn't want me because I'm radical. I do things differently. But I think the key thing for most business owners that they should be thinking about is that word purpose. And it's maybe been overdone in the last few years. You know, if anyone's read Simon Sinek's books about start with why and find your why, you know, we look at it and people say, oh, why do I need a why? I think it's key. And in the same as a marriage or life, we need to understand what our purpose is. And people have grappled with it, and I've grappled with it for years. And I think when you get clear about your purpose, you use that word identity, your identity becomes clear. And purpose is about setting a context. So we look forward to where we're going in the future, and we say, this is what we're aiming at. Jim Collins wrote a great book 20 years ago now, Good to Great. And in there, he looked at a whole slew of businesses and said, what are the success factors for the ones who have really done well? And he said he had what he called a big, hairy, audacious goal. And he said, if you've got that big, hairy, audacious goal and a core ideology around your purpose, you're more likely to succeed.
Right.
And I think business owners need to get clear about what it is, because back in 2018, 181 US businesses with Business Roundtable signed up to pledge, we're not just about making money anymore. We're going to have a purpose above and beyond making money. And I think in this last year of pandemic, those businesses that have meant more to society and the world around us are the ones that are going to come flying out the other end, because they engage people. So your thing about identity is really key. You've got to create your identity in something bigger than you, which is a purpose. And then you can get out of bed in the morning and say, I'm going to do this. I'm not just going to make money. I'm going to do this. I'm going to solve a problem. I'm going to change the world in some small way.
Right.
And that engages your team, engages your staff. You'll engage your communities. Actually, that's when businesses actually ultimately make more money. They do good in the long run. And that's, I think, the way I look at it from the point of view of identity and purpose are so intertwined.
Well, and I think purpose is it's it's always been very interesting to me, and just to go step into the Wayback Machine. So my PhD's in philosophy. I taught philosophy for years, and I was also the director of the cognitive science program here at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. So, and it was back in the day where, AI and artificial intelligence were new, and I worked in machine language learning, believe it or not, because my specialty was this obscure branch of logic, blah, blah, blah. But you would do these intro, survey courses in philosophy, and you would talk to kids and talk about ethics. And it was a very interesting set of conversations because, the lead-in was always, there are really three big questions. One, what is there? Metaphysics. Two, how do we know? Epistemology. And three, how should we behave? And really, I always said, what should we do about it? And that last one was ethics. And people were always troubled with the idea that ethics was not just about what is morally praiseworthy or these big concepts of good and bad, but just ordinary, everyday, well, how should we live, right? And when people talk about purpose, I think it can get very discouraging because we hear that and we think, I'm going to be a great painter, or I'm going to cure cancer, or I'm going to get all the plastic out of the oceans, or whatever, which are all great goals. But, purpose to me can be as simple as, I want to have the most, Steve Jobs, the famous thing about dropping the iPhone in a glass of water and there's air coming out. He says, we're not there yet because our design isn't efficient. So the things that say, I want to do a thing better, or I want to be more effective, that is a purpose. Being on a Formula One team and our purpose is to get around the track faster and safer than anyone else, that to me is a perfectly valid purpose. Is Formula One necessary to the moral well-being of the planet? I don't know. Depends on whether you like that versus football, I guess, right? Yeah. So, but I think people hear purpose and they think it's this big lofty stuff, and purpose can be, beautiful little everyday things. We have flawless zinnias in our florist shop or whatever, right? So,
and I think a lot of people do get hung up on it, and back 10, 12 years ago, I spent a lot of time navel gazing around what my purpose was. And as a coach, I kept on coming up with the word to help, and to help just sounded really passive. And I kept on thinking, I've got to have some grand purpose like you're talking about now. And, on my wall here, I've got the 17 UN sustainability goals sitting there. And I look at those and I think there's key ones in there. And one of those is about education. Mm-hmm. And I realized that for me, my purpose is just that. It's just simply the word to inspire. That may seem lofty and people think, what's that? But actually, I just want to inspire people to look at the world a different way. If I can do that, I can educate people on thinking differently. I can give them a different frame of reference on their business, because I know that one day they're going to thank me when they're either making more money or living the better lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And I want them to be living the better lifestyle. And purpose for me is around, how do I inspire people to step out and do things differently and realize they have a choice? So your point there about, the small purpose can be key. It is. It's just about working on what are you about. It doesn't have to be, the story. You talked about the story about jobs there, but I always think about the JFK story about, when they were asking the janitor what he was doing. And he said, I'm helping put a man on the moon.
Right.
Whether it's true or not, actually, that's what we're all about. Yeah. We've all got to clean the corridors. We've got to clean the toilets, whatever it might be. One day, that's what it will be. It's only when we get clear about that for ourselves, creating that perfect zinnia gives someone pride, gives someone passion, helps bring a smile to someone's face. That's what purpose is to me. It's the bit that just engages the emotional side of us, the puts the logical side away and brings a tear to your eye and says, that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. My wife, in between her careers in the finance, she was a banker for several years. She's a financial advisor now. And she just took a break because she had an opportunity and thought it was interesting and was kind of figuring some stuff out in terms of where she wanted to go in the finance world, and was the head of sales for a jewelry chain, largest independent jeweler in the U.S., and she ran the sales team for their flagship store. And we would talk to people and she would say, oh, it's just jewelry. And I had to stop her and say, hey, you're part of the most important experience of many people's lives. Yeah. Their engagement, or a graduation, or, a major anniversary. It's like what you do matters. Yeah. I would argue matters far more than what many commercial bankers do for most people's lives. And not to, dump on commercial banking, but But I think finding that purpose is important, and maybe no matter how big or small it is, the point is the intentionality. I mean, if you decide to follow Kurt Vonnegut and decide that our purpose really is just to fart around while we're here, at the very least, you should be focused on farting around instead of going to the same job you hate for 9 years, right? It's like, how could I fart around more effectively? I think that's a good question, right?
Go and have some fun. And I love that. If that's what it is, go and have some fun, because, we only have a short time on this earth. Go and do the thing you really want to do. And that's that word choice comes into it, because, now, and it's very hard easy for me to say this and hard to do sometimes. I believe everyone has a choice. And if your choice is to go and fart around, just go and do it.
Mm-hmm.
Find a way to bring your stuff of farting around to the world, and you'll have fun. And you might make some money, but you know what? You'll have a great time doing it as well.
Agreed. And one thing I think, and we have a lot of this discussion in the United States right now around issues of equity, social justice, and especially this idea of privilege. And regardless of what you may think about that, I think one thing is absolutely incontrovertibly true and inarguable. If you have the privilege in your life, if you're in a position in your life where you can make choices that are basically aesthetic, meaning about where I'm going to go in my career, what I want to do with my time, that is a privilege that if there are any moral absolutes and imperatives, it is morally imperative that you exercise that. The university has given you the ability and the freedom to make choices. You should make them. And that means, exercise your freedom, exercise your ability to choose, be conscious about what you want, because to have the ability to choose your life and then to go through it miserable is just, to me, the worst sort of sin in a lot of ways, right? Not to get too high and mighty about that, but I do think it's something that we lose sight of, is that regardless of what you may think about this, just the fact, if you look at the whole scope of human history, to be sitting here talking to each other across the Atlantic about having choice is a surreal and amazing blessing. Right? And to not exercise the abilities in your life to choose and take responsibility for how your life is put together is really to kind of spit in the face of a lot of that, and it's really kind of a crime, in my opinion.
It is, and it's really hard to do though, Andy. I think because this word choice, I use it and I band it around liberally. It's very hard because some people don't recognize they've got a choice, and I think I've been privileged over the last 15 years to be able to read and listen to audiobooks, watch videos. We're blessed with the internet. We can Google on you. We can go on YouTube straight away now and find books on motivation and changing your life. You've got to recognize that it's there in the first place. If you're not aware of it, you're never going to do anything with it. Sometimes, you come back to that job you said about me as a coach. My job is actually to hold up and say, hey, look, did you know this is available to you? You've got all these options you can choose. And people say, oh, I've got no choice. I'm stuck in where I am today. I can't change it. It's only when you realize actually you can. It's only stuck there because that's where you feel morally obliged to stick there. And you feel like that's where you grew up. Actually, you told me earlier you've moved around the world. Right. You did it because of your background. But actually, anybody could do that if they wanted to. A lot of the time, I think we get stuck in the way of doing things because we just feel we have no choice about doing something different because because of the way we're brought up or the education we've got or the lack of education we've got. At some stage, we need to sit back and say, okay, if I really did have a choice, what would I choose to do right now?
Sure. Well, and then we get into it, and I think there's some great stuff on the Ignium site about this too. And then we're talking about change management, right? Where to choose is to, and even to make, quote, the right choice is to say, wow, that's going to be a lot of work. And it's going to be hard to change these habits and to get out of this groove. And what if I make people angry and blah, 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 blah. And that's, in addition to being scary, it's hard work. It really is.
And this thing, hard work. Someone once said to me, the only place, I'll be able to get it wrong actually, the only place success comes after hard work. Got that wrong? In the dictionary. I've already got that wrong actually now. I've said it, completely mucked up the joke of the punchline. But anyway, success and hard work. I'm great at that, yeah. Success and work. There we go. The only place success comes before work is in the dictionary. There we go. That's the joke. Cut that bit out. and we have to put that work in. I do a lot of running. In fact, I did a lot of running until two months ago. I tore the cartilage in my knee. But
Oh,
I've run marathons for years. I've run lots of marathons. And back in 2017, I think it was, I decided I want to start. I raise money for charities, and I've been raising money for a cancer charity in the UK for a long time. And I realized that people knew I could run a marathon. Therefore, I had to come up with something different. And as I was getting older, I was never going to get any faster. So I started putting funny clothes on and started running marathons in fancy dress. And I've done the London Marathon lots of times, which is one of the most amazing experiences. So I figured, I love London Marathon. Let's put some fancy dress into it. So initially, my fancy dress was a wig. Now, running a marathon in a wig is easy because it just get hot head. I then started putting other costumes on, which made it harder. And one year, I decided I'm going to go for a Guinness World Record. So I thought, okay, what can I do? And it was a 2-year journey. So, okay, by April 2019, I want to have achieved a Guinness World Record. 2 years before that, I thought about it. I started training in it and working in it. And back on April 28th, 2019, I got my Guinness World Record. But it was a 2-year journey of hard work. So I'm now the proud owner of the fastest marathon dressed as an astronomical body, which I dressed up as the sun in this enormous costume. And I love the fact they called it an astronomical body. But the point I make is it took me a lot of work to get there. I raised a shed load of money,
right.
And I was committed to do it. So I had this vision, 28th of April, 2019. That was my goal, achieve that. Back in 2017, I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I worked my butt off to get myself there. Running around, it caused me a lot of problems. But, it worked. And I had a great ball doing it. Yes, I've got knee problems now, but I had a great time. The key was work and success. Success came after that work. Doesn't answer your question, but I thought I'd just tell you about my marathon anyway.
I love it. Well, and that means I just need to take a pause then and say, ladies and gentlemen, again, our guest is Phil Rose, but I guess I should really say world record holder Phil Rose, who is also the head of Ignium Consulting at igniumconsult.com, business and leadership consulting, but more importantly, world record holder. So there we go. I love it. I love it. Fastest marathon as a celestial body. That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant.
Got it.
I love it. Well, hey, all of this is just build up to the two most important questions you can ask anybody. So no pressure, but we're going to go ahead and move into that segment. One question, maybe the second most important question you can ask everybody or anybody is if you had it to do over again, and I love asking this of entrepreneurs in particular because most people, almost all the folks we've had on the show have been in business for many, many years. And that is an underappreciated achievement. If you have started a business and tried to go it on your own, you know how challenging that is. And so many businesses fail in their first 2 or 3 years. And people decide it's not for them. So if you've been in business for 10 years, 15 years, in my case, a lot longer than that, you've, at the very least, you've been very good at repeating the same accident that keeps you in business. But you've got some success. If someone were to come to you, regardless of what vertical they were in or what type of business they were going to start, and they said to you, hey, Phil, you've been doing business for a while, you own your own business, and you've helped a lot of people, what one piece of advice would you give that person as they start this journey to owning their own business in this journey into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, great one. And actually, you're saying one piece of advice. There's loads of pieces of advice I'd give. And if I wrap it into one sentence, would that work?
No, absolutely, yeah.
Because I think you've got to be confident. You've got to go for it. You've got to believe in yourself. Because actually, it's only you believe in yourself. And with that comes failure. And we always talk about, the failure leads to success. There's no such thing as an overnight success. It takes years.
Right.
And we often see people out there. And the key, I think, is be confident, be bold, and say, do you know what? I'm going to get there one day. Mm-hmm. If you keep doing it, you will find the way at some stage. Don't give up at the first hurdle, which a lot of people do. And they will stop themselves from being successful because they say, I'm not cut out for this.
Right.
So that's the bit. And I think the key to that is, I would always say this because it's true, but go and find a coach. Find someone who's done it before, right, who can bring that confidence to you and help you believe in yourself and ask you the questions. Because the coach, whatever you say about them, will help you on that journey. Mm-hmm. Sometimes when the world gets tough, they can say, Andy, remember why you're doing this. What's your purpose? Let's keep going. Get back on that horse. My piece of advice.
And I think that's so true. Dan Sullivan, who is the head of strategic coach, he's got a great phrase. The most important thing entrepreneurs can do is protect their confidence. There was a great Elon Musk tweet where somebody said, "Hey, Elon, if you could give entrepreneurs any words of encouragement, what would it be?" And he said, "If you need encouragement, you shouldn't be an entrepreneur." And I didn't take that as being a kind of a glib diss, but more, it's when you do this, when you go into business for yourself and you continue down that road, you really need to put protecting that confidence in yourself and in your dream and in your vision at the forefront. And it doesn't mean you do stupid things or anything, but you cannot get discouraged and let those emotions cloud your judgment. And I think if you are constantly looking to other people to encourage you, that's one reason why a coach is so important, because as much as I may love my friends and my family and this, that, and the other, they aren't always in a place to encourage me when things aren't going great. It's hard to come home to your spouse and say, "Hey, we just lost a big contract," and have that person go, "Oh, you're fine, go ahead," right? They're thinking, "Oh shit." And so I think having a coach is somebody, in addition to all of the other things that a good coach brings, having a coach there who knows that, that confidence has to be protected. In many days, it's the single most important asset you have. I think it's brilliant advice, and it's something people don't think about, right?
Exactly. They don't think about it. I think there's if you go on YouTube again, there's some great videos of people like Bill Gates or Eric Schmidt from Google talking about having a coach. We've all seen those around. I really believe it's the thing, because actually with a coach you can do things differently. How many sports stars at the top of the game haven't got a coach?
Right.
The answer is they've all got one, because they know that the coach can stand on the sideline and see stuff they can't see and correct the way they put their feet, correct the way they hold the bat, correct the way they hold the racket, whatever it might be, and they get their head set straight.
Yep.
When Tiger Woods missed a hole when he was at the top of his game, he always said, "I managed to move on from the last hole and just get on with the next one." Now, I use Tiger Woods loosely now at the moment, but anyway, at the end of the day, it's going into the next hole, moving yourself forwards. You might have missed that putt, but hey, there's another one coming. That's the key.
And that idea is shot through all I think good sports writing. And there are great phrases you hear, like in American football, there's the most important skill or asset that a quarterback can have is a short memory. And and in addition, it's funny you bring up Tiger Woods and golf. That sport is so fascinating to me. One, because I'm terrible at it, but used to play it a lot. But two, if you look at you look at the sport itself and you go, okay, somebody's going to give me golf. He's going to be my golf coach on my swing and this, that, and the other. All of the top players in both the women's and the men's tour all work with somebody from a psychological angle as well, because, golf, maybe more so than any of the, hugely watched sports that we have, is just an unrelenting mental game where you don't see any of the excitement. If somebody said to me Formula One racing or rally racing is a mental game, I would believe that in a moment. Anytime you're moving above 100 miles an hour, you really should pay attention. But golf, I'm just walking around on a course. I'm hitting a little tiny ball. It's like, and it's mentally exhausting. So I like that's a great analogy, and the people who get good at that game are the ones who've mastered this and continually work to master that the mindset, their confidence, and protect it. Absolutely. And business owners would do themselves so many huge favors to say, "Oh, hey, wait a minute. My mental health is an important part of my week."
Period. Yeah.
Yeah.
You've got to pick. And this is why your very first question to me when we started was around making time. I think you need to make sure you put that time in your diary. And color code your diary to say, okay, this is my time, and I protect it. Give myself time out from the day job to think on the business, to protect my mental health. And if you don't do it, someone else is going to get in your diary and steal that time away from you. You've got to be protective of it in the same way you'd protect it if you were seeing someone else important in your life, because actually you've got to treat you as number one importance. Without you, the business is nothing.
Right.
So put that time in and work on yourself and protect it with everything you can.
Yep.
I say to people, actually, you need to have 10% of your time every week minimum working on the business and you.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree
10%
with that
minimum.
wholeheartedly, and it's surprising, again, just like passing up the food that maybe you shouldn't eat so much of or whatever, and ordering the salad instead or what have you. It's hard to do. You think, oh no, I got to answer these emails, I got to return this call, somebody wanted to talk. It's like, yeah, but the long-term effects of that are really,
Yeah.
really damaging.
Yeah.
And the more you can do early on to get into that habit, I think is good.
Yeah.
Well, that is a great lead up to the most important question you can ask anybody in the business world. And that is, if you could have a meal with any living public figure, who would it be, why, and what meal would you have?
Oh God, you're going to laugh my answer to this one, Andy. So I thought long and hard when you asked me this question beforehand, and I was thinking I could put some grand person, I could put lots of things. And do you know what I chose? I chose Queen of England, Elizabeth II. And people say, why that? Just come British. And do you know why? I think she's been on the throne in this country in whatever power she is for such a long time. She's shaken hands with so many grand people. She's been insightful to what's happening around the world since 1952.
Oh yeah.
You think, how could someone, who's 95 now, have not seen things and heard things that I would just love to tap into her mind and say, what's going on? Tell me what the secret is. You're
Yeah.
95, you're still out on public service now. 45 years time, if I could be as fit as you, walking around, shaking hands and doing stuff, I'd love to be there. So that's who I think. And it's not just because I'm British or English. I think she's just an amazing person. And I would love to get inside that mind and just have a conversation with her about what's going on for her.
Well, and I like that answer. Well, I mean, I've liked all the answers I've had. I especially like that one because, something that we lose sight of, and I know, for instance, in the U.S., this the Netflix show, what is it, The Crown? That's been a huge success, and people watch it, and so on and so forth. And one thing that, and we've had a lot of answers to that. I've had people in back-to-back weeks say Michelle Obama and Donald Trump. And everybody that I've heard, I thought, wow, yeah, that I would love to be part of that meal. And again, it's true because, regardless of what we see of somebody in the media, there's a human being there and there's a story about who they are and why they are and what they've seen and what they've done. And I think that, looking at Queen Elizabeth and you look at the scope of her life and think, gosh, just, what she's seen, the decisions she's made.
Yeah.
And then you just look at the story of her life as well. I mean, she is a, and this is going to sound bizarre, but, there's a weird way in which she is the longest serving CEO on the planet. Right.
Well, I was thinking about like that. Yeah.
And she came to be the head of the firm in some very interesting circumstances. So it's one of those things where you look at her and think, gosh, the types of insights that she would have, both in terms of, what it's like to be so relentlessly in the public eye, what it's like to undergo just tectonic social change. Yeah. All of this, I would just love to hear, just to listen to her talk.
I would. I just think there's a story there, thinking, in the UK, how many prime ministers we've had in that time, how many she's liked or disliked, what she's seen in them, and how she's remained stoic against everything that's going on with her family and as you say, tectonics in the world over that time. I've never thought of her as being a CEO, but you're right. At the end of the day, she's the head of state, and whether people want a monarch in the UK or not, actually, she's a figurehead that attracts people to the country. She's in the public eye, and I just think it would be great to sit down and have lunch with her. And guess what? I wrote down what I was going to have lunch as well.
Oh,
and
that's good. Yeah.
So my go-to meal on a cold winter's day in the UK is a fish finger sandwich. And I don't know if do you have fish fingers in the same way we do in the US?
We do, yeah.
So I figured some nice piece of crusty bread with some mayonnaise and lettuce and tomato. It's just homely, and I just wanted to kick back and just have a really relaxed fish finger sandwich, maybe with a slice of cheese on it, and just sit down and eat that with her and say, "What's up?"
That's fantastic. I love it. Everybody likes to talk about this thing, masterminds, right? And it comes from the book Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, and And I don't know how many people really understand the origin of the phrase mastermind and how Napoleon Hill thought of it. But in his mind, what he did was he said, I want to pick all of the people who would be great advisors to me, and I'm going to imagine that I'm meeting with them in my mind, and I'm going to flesh them out as these personalities and say, what would they say? What would they believe? How would they think and act? And, now we have I'm going to get together with a group of other people. But, and I think that's valuable. But the original concept to me meant so much because it did two things. One, it made me think very, very seriously about the achievement of other people and to say, what can I learn from them without having them in the room? What can I read? What can I understand? What can I kind of imagine, if you will, and do that as two different personas? There's me and my problem, and then what would this person say? And this question, just for me getting to do this podcast and the answers that I've heard, every one of them I've spent time after the episode taped and thought to myself, yeah, wow, what an interesting conversation that would be. Boy, I bet that person has a lot to offer, no matter who it's been. And I've had a lot of really interesting answers. Elon Musk, I've had Oprah Winfrey, people, we've talked about that. We talked about Michelle Obama, Donald Trump. It goes on and on. And I just love this idea of taking the mental space to step back and say, wow, here's a person whose opinion interests me. What can I learn about them so that I could really kind of imagine in my head what would they do and what would they say? And you said something great about Elizabeth that I've always admired about her, is that she has, in her public persona and her public work, has always, evidenced a deep respect for the office and the role that she plays in the country. And has not allowed personal issues to become part of how she conducts herself, because that's, in her mind, that's the job, right? Yeah. And to have somebody in your mastermind who all right, well, Elizabeth, how would you solve this problem? Her perspective is really valuable, because it's the sort of, let's forget you and the family and this trouble or whatever. What does the nation need right now, and how best do we do that? And her sense of that has evolved over time, right? And so I really like hearing that, because it causes you to think about people who are public figures and in a lot of ways humanize them and say, okay, well, what is this person really like? What advice would they give? What would that conversation be like? And not that imagining it is as good as the actual fish fingers meal, but it's a great mental exercise. I think, to go through that benefits anybody. But great answer. That'll be our first royalty answer, so that's fun.
There we go. Nice to bring it to the table.
I regret to inform you that while my long-term goal is this podcast gets so famous that we have lots of great sponsorship dollars, and eventually we can pick a few people and have that meal with their choice, it is going to be really hard to swing lunch with the Queen of England. I'm just saying that right now. But if we had the resources, we would do our best. So
next time I'm in Windsor, if I'm passing, I'll knock on the door and just say, Andy needs a chat.
There you go. By the way, Phil and I are coming for lunch. We'll bring lunch. Don't worry.
Fish fingers are on me.
Well, great stuff. Thank you so much. You've given us so much of your time. Again, people, my guest is Phil Rose. He is the head of Ignium Consulting. He is at Ignium, IGNIUM consult.com. Usually I'm better at spelling. And in addition to doing business coaching and leadership coaching, Phil is also a world record holder. So I invite you to get in touch with him. But seriously, take a look at the website. One of the things as I went through, I really, there's a lot of great stuff there, but check out the Spark Tank section. It's some of the most thought-provoking and imaginative stuff I have read in the last month, and I do a lot of reading every month, so that is a non-trivial recommendation, and there's just a lot of really good stuff there. And Phil, you've got a podcast as well, definitely worth listening to. So thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time.
Andy, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It's been great to talk to you. And I should have mentioned, actually, I even wrote the book on fancy dress running called Fancy Running. You can get it on Amazon and all good bookstores in the village I live in anyway.
I love it. Fancy Running, author is Phil Rose, the world record holder for fastest marathon as a celestial body. We're not going to tease any more than that. You'll have to look it up, audience, and there we go. But Phil, thanks for being our guest. We really appreciate your time.
you, Andy.
Thanks for joining us. You can find contact information about our guest in the show notes for this episode. This has been the How I Make Money podcast by Brand Distillers. To learn more, visit branddistillers.com.